yourself in some trouble, didn't you?
If you just listen...
I can do this.
The Texas Chain Saw Massacre video game finally had its worldwide release, and I've been spending so many hours in this game. I've been looking forward to this game for quite a long time. Whenever a new asymmetric horror video game is set to come out, I get so giddy with excitement, and I play all of them day one. Well, all the ones that I can on console. Evil Dead the game, I was there day one. Friday the 13th the game, I was there day one. Arguably my favorite multiplayer game of all time is Dead by Daylight. I just absolutely love asymmetric horror games. And if you don't believe me that I love Dead by Daylight that much, this is a Dead by Daylight mug that I bought from their official merch store. People who aren't fans wouldn't do that. Leading up to this game's release, I avoided all media. This game has technically been out for quite a while now. A lot of people have had early access to it. There's already tons of content about this game already on YouTube, but I avoided it all. I watched like the first cinematic trailer, but that was it. When I went into this game, I didn't know how to play. I didn't know how to play as survivors. I didn't know how to play as the killers. I didn't really know what the goals and the objectives were, other than obviously if you're the family, kill, and if you're the victims, escape. I'm about to review this game for you. I'm about to show you some raw gameplay, but before I do, you should consider subscribing. I talk about horror video games all the time on this page, but I'm also just a huge fan of horror in general, and my whole page is based off of that genre mostly. I do trailer reactions, I talk about TV shows, and I talk about movies every now and then as well, so just consider subscribing if any of that seems interesting to you. But enough talking, let's get into the review for the Texas Chain Saw Massacre video game. So I'm gonna break this video up into 4 parts. Part 1 being me giving you just the overview of the game, the structure of the game, and how it's played. The second being the pros, the third being the cons, and then the fourth just being my overall thoughts. But before I do that, I want to make one thing crystal clear, and that's that, like I said before already, I am a huge fan of asymmetrical horror games, but I wouldn't really consider myself a hardcore fan. I'd consider myself more of a hardcore casual fan. For example, when it comes to each and every new Dead by Daylight update, or DLC, or expansion, I barely care. I honestly don't care at all about what perks have been nerfed, what perks have been buffed, what's changed about the meta. Me, as a player, what I care about is new cosmetics, new killers, new survivors, new maps. Just having fun in these games is what I care about. So just know that every opinion that you hear in this video comes from someone who's more of just a really, really strong casual fan, not someone who's obsessed with meta and that sort of thing. So like most asymmetric horror games, you get to play as either the survivors or the killers, or in this game, it's called the victims or the family. And first, I'm going to talk about what you do if you play as the victims. You start the game in the basement, and you can either do stuff solo, or you can team up with your fellow victims, and you try and escape the basement, and then you go up to the house or the gas station, depending on the map that you're on, and then you escape that part of the map, and then you're in the outskirts of the map, and then you have to escape the map overall, and then that's how you win. And you do this by unlocking doors, gathering resources, being stealthy, just overall trying to survive and not get caught and brutally murdered. And then if you play as the family, you're pretty much doing the exact opposite. You're trying to set traps, you're locking doors, you're trying to also be stealthy depending on the killer you're playing as, and you're just trying to hunt down the victims and kill them and make sure that under no circumstances they do not leave the property. And when it comes to progression, it's pretty simple. It's not the most in-depth progression system ever, but it is a progression system. It gives you something to work towards. You get to unlock different skills and different abilities for survivors and for killers. You get to upgrade their attributes. You get to unlock different cosmetics and that sort of thing. Just very basic progression stuff. Anyway, let's get into the pros of the Texas Chain Saw Massacre video game. The first being, this game just feels so fresh compared to most asymmetric horror games that I have played. And a big reason for that is because, as I'm sure you already know, there's more than one killer this time around. Most games like this, there's one killer. You're a one-man team. You're doing everything yourself. But In this game, there's 3 killers in every single match, and it just makes it so fresh for both the victims and the killers. The killers because you actually have to use teamwork. You actually have to strategize with your fellow killers. And there's nothing more satisfying in this game than communicating with another killer, where you see them chasing a victim down a corridor, and then you block off that victim's escape route, and then you two just tag team them to death. It's so fun and it's so refreshing. And then from the victim perspective, it's refreshing because you feel even less safe than you do in other games like this. Where games where there's one killer, you'd hear Leatherface's chainsaw in the distance, you'd hear him chasing down one of your teammates, and you'd assume you're safe where you are because you're far away and he's distracted, and it gives you time to do whatever you need to do to escape. But in this game, you could hear Leatherface a mile away, but simultaneously you have no idea if the hitchhiker is in the room next to you, if he's stalking you at this very moment. And just the variety of gameplay amongst the different family members and victims is so satisfying, and it makes each and every round feel surprisingly fresh. Like, for example, if you're playing as Leatherface, you can run around like a psychotic maniac. You can be breaking down barriers and breaking down doors. But again, if you're playing as the hitchhiker, you can be stealthy. You can be hiding around a corner. You can be hiding in a bush. You can essentially be playing the game like a victim, but you're killing them instead of helping them. And it's just something that I really appreciate, that it has this much of a variety of gameplay on launch day. Like, I'm not saying other asymmetric horror games don't have some sort of variety when it comes to gameplay, but usually that happens through the duration of years and years of updates and DLC and expansion packs. This has a lot of variety on day one, which is super cool. And the same can be said for victim characters. Like, for example, if you're playing as Leland, you can be a bit more ballsy than most other victims due to his ability to just stun family members and knock them down. But other victims can't do that, so that changes up gameplay in a really cool way as well. And I will say that just based on the different types of gameplay that Texas Chain Saw Massacre offers, again, on day one, I am super, super satisfied. It's more than Friday the 13th or the Evil Dead game had at launch, especially for survivor gameplay. And for the victims, like most other asymmetric horror games, or just multiplayer games in general, it's so much more fun and so much more satisfying when you're playing with at least one other friend using comms. Working together to find keys or tools or health items, working together to be stealthy, working together to find the exit routes, or having one of you distract the killer while the other one tries to do a task. And it just lends to the overall tension and the overall cinematic feel that this game has. And speaking of that, this game has so many moments that just feel like they're coming straight from the movie, and that's just due to just how fun the gameplay is for both the victims and the family. Like, there's been so many moments where I almost escape, or I did escape, and it felt like something out of a screenplay. It felt like something out of a Texas Chain Saw Massacre film, where I'd be running down a hallway, and then I'd be cut off, and then I'd jump out a window as the victim, and then survive barely. And it's so just anxiety inducing. It gets my heart pounding, and I love it. And again, the same can be said for the killers, where someone is about to escape and you're on them, and then you get them at the last moment, and it's so satisfying. Or you don't get them at the last moment and they manage to escape, and it's just so stressful knowing how close you were, but it motivates you that much more to be even better, to use even more communication in the next round. I want to interrupt the review for a short intermission, and I want to talk to you about the physical copy of the Texas Chain Saw Massacre video game. Unfortunately, nowhere around me was really carrying this day of release. My local video game store, which I always go to, they didn't even have a listing for it. My local Walmarts, my local Targets, hell, even my local GameStops didn't have this on launch day. The only place around me that had it on release day was Best Buy, so thankfully, luckily, I was able to get a physical copy. And I just love owning physical media of the things that I like, the things that I'm looking forward to. I like having a physical memento to show off an actual purchase that money went towards an actual item. And I like how with this game, you actually get another little bonus in it. You get an 11x17 poster, and I think that's really cool. It's just a cool poster of the key art for the video game, and you can be sure that I'm going to get a frame, and this thing is going to be hanging on my wall for quite a long time. And I just love it when developers do stuff like this, where they actually put in at least a little bit of effort into their physical media releases. But anyway, let's get back into the review. Now I'm going to get into some of the cons that I have with Texas Chain Saw Massacre, and unfortunately there are quite a bit of cons, but I will say right off the bat that I don't think any of these cons are detrimental to the overall longevity that I hope this game has. I don't think any of it is gonna ruin the game or break the game or make it so it doesn't have theoretically a long lifespan. One of the most annoying cons that this game has is that someone in the family team is forced to play as Leatherface every single round. And it's super stressful when you've already played several rounds as Leatherface and then you load into a lobby and the other two family members are already taken and they're already readied up, and it just forces you to play as Leatherface yet again. I don't really understand why Leatherface needs to be part of every single match, especially since unfortunately he's one of the less fun family members to play as, which really sucks. Don't get me wrong, he's still fun to play as. It's still fun to be Leatherface, flailing your chainsaw around, breaking a whole bunch of shit, but his gameplay doesn't have that much depth, so he gets kind of boring kind of fast. So again, it really sucks that someone is forced to be him every single game. It gets to the point where whoever is playing as Leatherface, it just kind of feels like they're taking one for the team, that they don't actually want to be playing as him. And I will say that playing as the family can still be fun if you're solo queuing, if you're not using comms to communicate with a friend or something like that, because there's lots of abilities for you to see where your fellow family members are, to see what they're doing, and you can kind of strategize based off of that ability, but it's far less fun as the victim if you're solo queuing. If you're playing as a victim by yourself, there's not much communication going on at all. In fact, there's barely none. There's nothing that this game really does to truly incentivize teamwork, and that's disappointing. And I'll get more into that in a little bit. And the structure of this game is fun, but it has so much potential to be better. I feel like there needs to be more emphasis on actual teamwork on both sides, the victims and the family. For example, each killer has a role, but I wish that their roles and what they were able to do and not do were more tied to the structure of a match and more tied to how easy or not easy it is for the victims to progress. You can tell that the developers put those kinds of features in, but there's not a lot that this game does to really enforce or encourage specific killers from playing specific ways or doing specific tasks, and it really feels like there needs to be. I feel like there should be like a checkbox like list of objectives that change depending on what killer you play as, because when most games end, it leaves a feeling of emptiness in terms of actual gameplay, if you know what I mean, for both sides, because it doesn't really feel like a game progresses in any meaningful way. It just feels like it ends, or just everyone dies and that's it. I'm gonna compare it real quick to the structure of the Evil Dead, the game. For example, if you're playing as the heroes in Evil Dead, you're all working towards the same goal simultaneously, and every survivor character can see how far along you are in the current task. First, you start off by finding 3 parts of a map, and then you start off by collecting pages of the Necronomicon, and then the dagger, and then it ends with you doing epic boss fights. You're all working towards the same thing. This game doesn't really have that. It doesn't have any very obvious telltale signs of how far along a match is going. So it just kind of feels like one character can be left in the dust, not really knowing what's happening. Another character can completely solo it and escape in a matter of just 5 minutes. It doesn't feel like there's anything really connecting everyone's gameplay together for both victims and family members simultaneously, and that's disappointing. For example, I'm gonna also compare it to Dead by Daylight. If you're solo queuing in Dead by Daylight as a survivor, you don't really have to be communicating with fellow survivors through comms. You don't gotta actually be talking to them or using chat or anything like that for the game to kind of encourage encourage you to still work together in a lot of ways. In that game, you can see how many generators your team has done. You can see if one of your fellow survivors are down, and you're encouraged to help them work on the same generator to get it done faster. You're encouraged to distract the killer while another survivor gets a generator done or unhooks a survivor. You're encouraged to still work towards the same things at the same time, even if there's no, again, communication truly happening. This game just doesn't have that, and it's really, really disappointing. And this game really needs to implement some sort of features like that, some sort of togetherness, even if you're not truly together, even if you're not truly working together. Like, you see notifications all the time that your fellow victims have escaped, if they've escaped the basement or if they've escaped the game overall, but it never really keeps you in the know about what they're doing. I guess in a way it adds to the immersion and the realistic factor of the game. You could argue that it's actually a positive in those ways, and I guess I could understand that, but it just makes playing feel lonely in a solo experience. And I can see a lot of people getting bored with this game after just a couple matches if they don't have people to actually play with and communicate with. And the biggest thing that this game is lacking, in my opinion, is the lack of a shared climax for everyone in the game. Again, I'm going to compare it to the Evil Dead, the game. The survivors are all working towards the same objectives, and then one objective leads to the other, and then it leads to a final boss fight. And then the demon in that game, which is the killer, knows exactly what stage they're on, and it all leads them to the same end location. By the end of the game, everyone should theoretically be in the same spot, doing the same thing for one epic final showdown. The same can be said in, again, Dead by Daylight, that once those generator doors open, all the survivors know what they should be doing. The killer knows what they should be doing. There's just none of that in this game. There's no shared conclusion. There's no shared steps. It just kind of feels very cluttery. But I do want to say that all of those cons, I feel like, can be fixed, and they should be fixed, because this game has so much potential to be fantastic, to be great, to be one of the best asymmetric horror games ever. And now I'm going to get into my overall conclusion, and that's that this game is fantastic. It's one of the best asymmetric horror games that I've played on day one, and that's saying a lot. I just really hope that the developers care about this game enough to see it through, to update it, and to have the balls to make mega changes for the better. I hope that they don't become lazy. I hope that they don't refuse to change things, even if it would make it a better game. I really hope that they pull a Dead by Daylight like those developers do, and they truly, in their opinion, and for the most part, make mega changes and aren't afraid to keep this game alive through updates and expansions all the time. I'd love to see more original and licensed characters and maps. I would lose my shit if there was a remake expansion pass for this game soon. I would love to play as remake Leatherface. I would love for a map to be on that remake house. That would be so fun. I just hope that they don't do Evil Dead the game, unfortunately, where they have a really great concept and the game is really, really fun when it launches, but then the tweaks that they make just kind of ruin the game. I remember when the Evil Dead the game came out, one of the biggest praises that reviewers gave that game, and it's something that I agreed with, is that there was a surprisingly well-balanced experience for both survivors and killers. But if you play that game now, it's leaning heavily one way or the other. And this game is balanced for the most part right now, at least in my opinion. I just hope that what the developers do and what they change keeps the balance there. I hope that this game doesn't eventually become killer-sided or victim-sided. That would be so disappointing to me. And obviously, we'll see how matches feel once this game has been around a bit longer, because obviously I played this on launch day. I played this a little bit after launch day. Everyone is new to this game. Everyone is still figuring it out together. I'm really curious to see how this game feels once both victims and the family truly know what they're doing. Well, there you have it. There's my full review for the Texas Chain Saw Massacre video game. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Or have you not even played the game yet? Let me know in the comments. And once again, consider subscribing. I talk about horror video games all the time, but I also do TV show discussions, trailer reactions, movie discussions, that sort of thing. I hope you check out the channel, and I hope to see you in the next video. And thank you for watching, especially if you watched this far.